Welcome and thank you for joining today's webinar, 12 Best Practices for Controlling Linux and Unix Account Privileges. We're really excited. We're here with cybersecurity expert Derek A. Smith. You're also joined by Beyond Trust Product Manager Rod Simmons, who will run us through a Beyond Trust overview and demo towards the end of the webinar, so please stick around for that. My name is Sarah, your webinar host today. A kind reminder to please submit your questions via the chat box in the GoToMeeting console anytime throughout the webinar, and we'll cover your questions at the end during our Q&A time. So anytime you have a question, just pop it on in, and I will be monitoring those throughout. Also, today's session is being recorded, and as attendees, you will receive a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within 1 business day from now, and that will be emailed to the email with which you registered for the webinar. So at this point, I'd like to hand this on over to Derek, who will jump right in. He's got a lot of content to cover. So Derek, please jump right in and welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you for having me back. And hello, everybody, and welcome to today's webinar. Hopefully, you'll pick up a few things from this, and I'll make it a little bit exciting and not too boring. But anyway, let me start by saying this with the introduction. So as a Unix or a Linux system administrator, or if you're a security professional listening to this, your purpose is to manage users of your information system and manage how or at least allow only limited access based on that user's needs onto your system. So as you're aware, though, users can mess things up, and that's just the way things happen. Even if they're an administrator and have all that training, people mess things up. So it could be anything from that newbie administrator who goes beyond their knowledge level. It can be an application developer who's running a script with root privileges when they shouldn't be, or it can be a hacker accessing your system. So ultimately, you folks who are listening to this are responsible, and you don't want to have to go back and explain to your boss, or if you're the boss, explaining to your clients how a breach or a loss of information happened, and also having to go back and clean up that mess. So controlling what users can and cannot do once they've accessed your Unix or your Linux server within your environment is the main goal of all of you all, of every system administrator and every security analyst. So Unix and Linux systems require an account for users to access the system. And they're typically only accessed directly by people when they're performing some type of administrative activity on that operating system, and or on an application or on some data. So the system itself requires a certain account to function properly, and applications require some form of account on the server to work properly. So managing these privileges can be done in a lot of different ways, and I'm going to talk about that today. And it can be done with a lot of different tools, even tools that's already inside Unix or Linux. One of the best methods, though, is through privileged access management and some type of privileged access management tool, preferably one that's going to allow you to centralize management of your system when you're doing this. So that's kind of what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to give you those 12 best practices that you can use for privileged identity and access management. Now, before I do that, I just want to kind of introduce myself. Again, my name is Derek Smith, and I am basically, well, first of all, I'm a government IT program manager again. So I'm back to the government because I'm close to retirement. Well, I'm a board advisor on a couple of different colleges and the Washington Center for Cybersecurity. I'm a college professor at UMUC, which is the University of Maryland, and the University of Maryland Baltimore College. I've written several books, as you can see on the slide, on cybersecurity, and I own a small training company called Catella Cybersecurity Solutions. As you can see also, I'm on television quite often, talking about cybersecurity on various news programs and news channels. So I know a little bit about this area. I also was a federal agent for 18 years, which got me close to the other side, the forensic side of cybersecurity. So I just wanted to set that up and tell you where I am before we dive into this subject. These are some of the 12 practices that I'm going to talk about. I won't go through them all now. But first I'm going to introduce, it says 13 there, of course, because first I'm going to introduce you to a few types of Linux accounts. Then talk about securing your accounts, using some of the built-in monitoring tool, controlling Linux and Unix use, account management, using least privilege, management passwords, and so on and so forth. And I'll get to these as we work through this webinar today. Now let's look at some of the basic type of Linux accounts that's out there. This is just a partial list of the used accounts or used type of files and terms and utilities that's out there. It won't be an exhaustive list, but this is some of the main ones I want to talk about. etc password, etc group, ID, who, w, sudo, su, which is substitute user. We're going to talk about a few of these as we go through this. And I bring these up because I'll come back to them in other parts of the webinar. Now, the predominant administrative account that we use on Linux system is called the root account, and most of you all know that. If you don't know Linux, then this is just a this is a refresh for you if you know it. If not, it's just a little bit of basic information. But usually that root account has the user ID of 0. And to manage your Linux system, you're going to need to access this account either directly or through using sudo. And as we discuss this further throughout this webinar, you're going to see that sudo is the preferred method of delegated administration. Okay, it is the administrator users don't need access to the root password because we can give them access to using sudo. Instead of logging into the system directly as root or using the substitute user command, which is su, they can use this. So each Linux host must, at the minimum, have a local root account defined in the etc password file. Now that local user account is stored in etc password, and then passwords, on the other hand, are usually held in what's called the etc shadow file, which I don't have up there. Each one of the users, including that root user, is going to need both that user ID and also a group ID. And then those users have to belong to a minimum of one group. Now, some systems that you use, if you use Red Hat or Ubuntu or something like that, Red Hat runs a private group system where users belong to their own private groups, or they can belong to shared groups. Now, those local groups are recorded in the file etc group. It's called etc group. And with root privileges, those users can be created and managed with the command user add or group with the command group add. And don't get caught up on all these terms that I'm using, but this is just kind of an overview. So even though you would be expected to use the tools that's provided to manage users and groups, there's nothing stopping you from stopping you from making changes that can be made directly to the appropriate files. Now, another thing we have, if you want to go out and you're a security analyst or you're a system administrator and you want to display information about a particular user account, whether you are on another account or whatever, you can use what's called the command ID. So by default, this command ID is going to display the username, user ID, and the group ID in any secondary groups that person might be in. So that first shot that you see up top is the output from the ID. It gives you a little information about the user, Andrew, what group he may be in, that type of thing. If I want to get a little bit more information, I can use the command called finger. Okay, that can be used to display further information about that user's account. Okay, and that second screenshot shows you the output from finger. You see I have the last login dates and things like that. I have the directories that he was using, so I can get a little bit more information. Another thing that we have is that if I want to return information on users that's already logged in, currently logged in users, I might need to bring, or if I have to bring, let's say, the server down for maintenance or something like that, I can use the command who or w. These can be useful for me as well. Now w, I got it here with typical Linux humor. The shorter command w provides more verbose output. What it does is give me a little bit more information about what that person is doing on the system. Also, I told you can control access using what's called sudo. So controlling access to sudo with sudo and what you're allowed to do with it is a task that root user is going to achieve through editing the files using something like sudo user. I'll get to that in just a second. But as you see here, sudo is one of the ways we have to achieve editing of that file, sudo users, that I'm going to talk about in just a second. With that, the knowledge of that root password, if I want to go in and I use sudo, I don't have to give anybody that root password. It's not required when I'm administrating that host, but the commands have to be preferenced, as you see here in my example with sudo. So I have to put sudo and then whatever the command is I'm going to use. Now on some systems like Ubuntu, which I talked about earlier, mentioned earlier, that root account password is not shown during the installation, and all the tasks are going to be managed through using sudo. Okay, So this is a correct administration model that we can have that's avoiding directly accessing the root account. Remember, the root account is the keys to the kingdom. I don't want anybody getting their hands on that, so I'm going to try to limit access to that as much as I can. Now, if I want to, well, let me take a step back. When I'm using sudo, when required, if I have access to that root password that I spoke about, I might be able to use that su command. I'm just going to go back for a second. That su command that I talk about, which is substitute user, to substitute my current user ID with my root user ID. All right. It's possible for me to disallow remote access, let's say via SSH, what I'll talk about in a little while, to that root access. Now they can still log on as a standard account, and that SSU to that root is going to be required. But enough about that. That's enough about basic commands. Let's move on to some of the Linux, Unix built-in monitoring that we have access to. So before I go into actual using of a password management system, there are already some tools that are built into Unix that allow you to have some type of control, okay, some type of Linux Unix control. So controlling what someone can do once they've accessed your Unix or your Linux server when you're in the environment is our main goal. That's the main goal for every system administrator and every security analyst to set their sights on. So your system admin has a goal of allowing other users of that system only limited access, okay, because as I said earlier, unfortunately they can mess things up. So it could be anything from, again, that novice guy who's overstepping their knowledge and don't know what he's doing, or it could be an application developer running a script with root privilege that does something like what you see on the screen, which could essentially remove all your files. And we definitely don't want that to happen. No system administrator wants to have to explain how that happened if he removed all the files, or again, go back and clean up that mess. Okay? And then me as a security guy, I have my own selfish reasons for doing this. I want to prevent the compromise of important systems and data and keep my company out of the headlines and in the end keep my job, because you know we can always, as security people, end up being the scapegoat. Now, I said there's some built-in tools that we can use. So if you need to monitor a Linux server or your Linux server's performance, you can try the built-in tools that come along with it, and then you get a few add-on tools that you can use with that. Most Linux distributions are going to be equipped with a bunch of different monitoring tools. And those tools are going to provide me or you with some metrics which can be used to get information about my system activities. So you can use these tools to find the possible causes of, let's say, some type of performance problem that you have, or you can use it for security purposes. Now, what I'm going to give you now are some of the basic commands that when it comes to system analysis and debugging server issues. Now, let me say this. I'm just going to provide a few quick commands. There's a lot of other ones out there that you might be able to use. Just Google some. I've seen 20. While I was researching this, I saw 20 commands and 50 commands. There's a lot of different things to use. But let me give you a few that I would use as a security guy. Now, one is top, and that's the process activity command. So that top program provides a dynamic real-time view of the systems that's running on my actual systems. It's going to give me my actual process activity. I might want to look at that. So by default, it displays the most CPU intensive tasks that's running on my server. And then it updates that list every 5 seconds, you know, if your system does it that way. So what you see is an example of the kind of information I see running out there. The root user, the Vivek user, those type of things. Now, there are certain commands that you can use for hotkeys that's going to give you different types of usage of that top command. This is a list of them. I won't go through them all, but T displays summary information on and off. M displays memory information. O enables you to interactively select the ordering within top. K issues a kill command. So these are some of the hotkey commands that we can use with top. Oops, went a little bit too far. Okay, if I want to find out who is logged on to my system and what they're doing, which might be important to me as a security guy, I can use the W command. So this W command displays information about the users currently on my machine and the processes that they're running. And output looks something like this. As you see, I have the users, I have their IP address, when they logged in, those type of things, what they were doing, so I can kind of monitor what's going on in my system. Again, this is a built-in tool. Another one is the SAR, and that's collect and report system activity. All right, so the SAR command is used to collect, report, and save system activity information. Okay, and there's different things I can do. You have to display the network counters there. You can display real-time usage using SAR. So this is another one of those commands, and the output from SAR looks like this. Okay, percentage of user, what they were doing. You know, so again, I can watch what's happening on my Linux or Unix system. The last one I want to talk about is right now is TCP dump, okay? Because this gives me a detailed network traffic analysis. So as it says here, the TCP dump is a simple command to dump traffic on a network. However, you need a good understanding of TCP/IP in order to utilize this tool. I say that because in some places I worked, I had systems analysts who were watching live data, doing live traffic analysis, but they weren't understanding what they were seeing. So it's very important that if you're going to do that, you understand what it is that's coming across your screen. If you go down a little bit, it says to display all, you can display all IP version 4 HTTP packets. You can display your FTP sessions. You can display, here's the one I like, you can use Wireshark, which is another important security tool we have to view detailed information about files that's on your system. So good, again, that's good for security. Now, let's look at, sorry, I don't know why I pushed the button once and it jumps twice. So now let's look at the best Unix and Linux privilege identity and access management type of things you can do. And basically, privileged access management revolves around a few simple concepts. Basically, what I'm trying to find out is who can get to a server, how they can get to that server, and what they can do once they get on my server. That's what's important to me as a security guy. So the first things I told you is 12 things. I should have numbered them for you, but the first thing I have is manage accounts. If I want to talk about access control and privilege management, it has to start with accounts that are set up to allow the use of my system in the first place. So creating accounts, first of all, is a pretty easy task, right? It's easy to create an account, but disabling or removing those accounts that are no longer required is a different problem, and that's often where my problem lies. Okay? The risk that's introduced by leaving those accounts active that should not be is something that's going to be serious to our organization. You know, it's a risk to our organization. So Unix and Linux systems require an account somewhere for people who, to use to access that system. And typically with Unix Linux systems, they're only accessed directly by people when they're performing some type of administrative activity on my operating system or on your operating system or in your application or your data. So the system itself is going to require certain accounts to function properly, like that all-powerful root account that I've been talking about. And applications require some form of account on the server to properly function. So although managing people accounts that I give out is what most people think about when they think of account management, leaving system and functional application accounts out of the planning and process for account management is going to leave a gap for us, and it's going to introduce risk into your system. So my point here is that you have to manage all of your accounts, not just your people accounts. The second thing is you need to implement least privilege. And this is not just for Unix, this is for everything we do. But when an account is allowed to do, I shouldn't say when, but what an account is allowed to do once it's been logged into is arguably more important than controlling who actually logs into that account in the first place. So imagine that everybody on your enterprise can log into your system. And they can, the thing we want to make sure is that they can only do what's appropriate for their job. Many people would not be allowed to do anything at all if we just shut down everything. So the risk of allowing access is far less important than controlling what those people do once they get access. So in order to determine what I want to do, these are the kind of questions you might ask, the ones I have up on the screen. Does every one of your administrators need to be logged in as root? Probably not, and it's likely not. You know, they definitely shouldn't be root. Use sudo so you can assign them something else. Do they need to be able to run every command that root has privilege to run? Probably not. Do your database administrators need root access, or should they be prevented from running system commands that are not part of their daily job? What about accounts used for app-to-app communications? Do they need that kind of access? Probably not. And does one computer talking to another require access to every command that can be run on that system? So these are the kind of questions you want to be asking yourself when you're trying to implement least privilege. The next thing you want to do is manage your password. So although strong authentication is recommended for the people accounts that I keep talking about, or for people to log in with, there are times and places where your passwords are still going to be there. They must be used, and they have to be used for whatever process you're doing. So where passwords exist, of course, they need to be managed. And most people have some experience with it. I'm sure everybody I'm talking to on this call have experience with managing passwords, whether you're a technical person or you're not. But managing those passwords includes the basics I have on the screen. You know, require that password to be changed periodically. Don't allow the reuse of those old passwords. Require that they be of some level of complexity, you know, 15 characters or something like that. These are all basic password management things that you already know. But what you need to understand is that managing passwords need to mean all of your passwords when you talk about Unix and Linux systems or any system. Your users, your application, your functional passwords, your service accounts, and of course that all-powerful root account that I keep talking about. Next is you need to eliminate shared accounts. So this is especially important in the respect to the people that access your system. You know, two administrators of your system should not share an account. And I used to go out and do travel around the country looking at, I can't think of where I'm looking at, but checking out other people's systems. I worked for Booz Allen and a couple other places. So again, those two administrators should not share an account. I saw it a lot in the field. So eliminating those shared accounts is going to provide traceability and accountability for those actions that's being performed in your system. And not just the administrators of the operating system, but anybody who has access to your system to work on an application or data. Now I know that for some of you all, that could become a lot of accounts to manage across a lot of different servers. But our goal of not having any two people share an account for access to the system should drive our planning process, not about how hard or how easy it is. So if we're going to implement a privileged access management system, our goal is shutting down access to that system, not sharing accounts. Now, there are going to be some accounts that just don't go away. They're going to have to be shared. We're going to have them. Every Unix and Linux system has a root account. I already established that. And a lot of applications have an account set up to associate its process with and limit the application's privileges that's on that system, right? So sometimes your operating system application or data administrator is going to need to perform some activities with the privilege of that operating system or that application or that data service. So you can't avoid this. But if you are going to share that account, implement a system where a person can execute commands as another account without having to log in as or become that identity. What I mean is we don't want them to become that root account. So that your traditional, I mentioned this a couple of times, but your traditional Unix Linux sudo command does this for you. It's going to allow a user to elevate privilege or change identity and run a command with the privilege or the identity that they've called on to use for that. Okay? So this type of model is going to eliminate the need for you having a shared account, and it's going to provide the required traceability that I talked about earlier and accountability for activities that's being performed through your system. Right? Now, people are not the only account that we might have, and there's at least one other account that system administrators have to use. And again, that's that root account. And there might be other accounts depending on what your system is doing and how it's being used. But when nothing else, what I advise you all to do is substitute I should say, when nothing else is going to substitute for logging in as the root user, you need to have a model that provides the ability to attribute the use of that account to a person, and again, provide accountability for that use when it's required. The next best practice is for you to control access. Not every account that we have on our system or on our service is equal. We know that. Not every account available to systems need to be able to access everything over our network. So if you've properly implemented privilege control, like I stated before, then nobody needs to log in as root when they, let's say when they SSH to the system to perform maintenance. But root will need to be able to log in at the console. And for that rare occasion when you have to do that, you know, something has gone terribly wrong and an administrator actually needs to come into the building or something like that and be at the keyboard center, you have to make sure that you control access. Now again, I told you not every account needs to access every server from every computer on the network. So those automated authentications that we might have from app to app or from system to system don't need to be available everywhere. So in fact, almost by definition, you should only, well, I shouldn't say you, well, you should only allow those accounts to be allowed from the system that's performing the actual task I needed to perform. So if that target if the target should only allow that account connecting that way and doing that stuff that I needed to do from some defined location that I set up. So controlling access is very important. Next is, of course, people hate this. People say it all the time, but we need to log. We need to log everything that we do, of course. And I talk about logging all the time. You know what? I want to take a step back. There's a point I want to make about controlling access. Your administrators should have some type of constraints as well. We usually have our sysadmins, and they can go in and they can do a lot of different things, and we give them a lot of freedom. But they need to have some constraints too. Your administrator, or if your administrator, let's say, is in a secure location, on a secured network, in a secure system, they might be allowed to do much more than if they log in from their laptop over VPN from a hotel room, let's say. So let's say, so basically what I'm trying to say is your access, as I say in my last bullet point, needs to be granular. And the context of that access should feed into your authorization decision, whatever type of decision you make. So where, when, and how an account accesses a system should inform that authorization decision that you have to make about what that account can do when it gets there. So now let's look at logging, because I want to log that access that people are getting as well. So you want to log changes, you want to log access, you want to log privilege, you want to log failures. All these things should be tracked. So logging is just a good idea, and we already know that. A lot of us know that we need to log, and sometimes by compliance we have to log, but a lot of us sure don't like going back and reading those logs. And some people don't even know how to read them, and that's even worse. Okay? But most security guys get that logging is a good idea. But we also know that it takes time, and it takes resources to store and evaluate all those messages. And that could be from hundreds of messages to even thousands of messages every single day. Not just over a year, but every single day. So you need to be able to report on who has access to what and when they have access. And as I said before, this is required by a lot of forms of regulation, from like PCI, if you guys are in the PCI, the payment card industry, your PCI standards, HIPAA, your business rule like SOX, you know, and new laws about personal information and privacy, all require you to log stuff. So recording, logging any changes to accounts, changes to entitlement, additions and deletions, or other activity that pertains to the rules that's affecting your business, and who can access your accounts and who can access what from where and when, is called your logging trail. So again, all changes to your accounts, your access levels, and other rules that you have need to be recorded so that an administrator that changed the rules can be identified. If I have to go back, I used to be an investigator. I was an agent for 18 years, and we used to go out and do audits, you know. And if I come out and do that audit, I want to also be able to identify who changed the rules, who did what. So that's going to help with your logging. So logging access is almost a no-brainer, right? Log who's in, log who logs in. That's all it really is. Know which account is being used, how it's being authenticated, or how it authenticates, and where it comes from and how it connects. All going to be important. Whenever an account needs to execute some type of command with a different level of privilege, that should be recorded. Okay? This goes back to who does what. In law enforcement, we say who, what, where, when, why, and how. This goes back to who does what and when they do it. Okay? This is very important for a number of different reasons. And one of them is if you have privileged operations, they have the capacity to potentially access any data available on your system, and they have the capacity to destroy or damage anything that's on your system. So this can take your enterprise down. We definitely don't want that, right? So there are two things here that should be considered. First, you need to know who did a bad thing, if a bad thing did happen, and hopefully a bad thing didn't happen. But if it did, the second thing you need to remember is people who are being watched, people are paying attention to, they tend to have better behavior, and they tend to not do things the wrong way and not do bad things. And then lastly, and probably arguably the most important, is log failures. So if an account performs some automatic authentication that uses, let's say, SSH key for authentication, and all of a sudden that account is trying to access with the key from a host that it shouldn't, then that's a problem, and that's a problem you want to know about. So of course, it would be best for you to block that access in the first place, and then send out some type of notification. I'll talk about that in a minute. So this type and any type of failure in your logs due to rules in place is going to tell you two things. First of all, it's going to tell you what's wrong with your system, what's wrong with your server, your system, and then it's going to tell you that something is happening and it shouldn't be happening, or that shouldn't be happening, and you're going to want to look into it. Okay. The next thing I have is that you should manage and record your privileged activity. So knowing who has access, who accesses what host, when they access it, from where they access it, how they access it, that's all good and fine. I talked about that before, and your log is going to tell you that. But knowing that the account then elevated and granted privilege to somebody and then executed additional commands is even more important to know. I need to manage that privileged activity. I need to know what it is that they're doing. So if bad things happen, it's great for me to be able to go back and analyze that data and figure out who did what. However, logging of that activity at that keystroke level is going to allow me to see exactly what they did. And when bad things happen, it's the details that matter. If I'm doing incident response, which I did at Booz Allen for a while, I need the details. I need to know what they hit, what they were doing, what they were messing around with, so I can go in and fix it, right? So managing who has the right to what, where they can do it, what they can do, when they can do it, that's a powerful tool. And administrators often need to run commands with a privilege other than those assigned to their own account. So this could be an application, or it can be database administrators that has to perform maintenance or configuration operations, or it can just be the system administrator. And generally, in the past, those administrators all wanted to be granted total control. If you're a sysadmin, you wanted to have root access, right? However, this is just not necessary for everybody. Root access is just a shortcut, and that's an easy way out, okay? It's a way for them to get access to everything they need. So it's guaranteed to prevent privilege management from becoming an impediment to their productivity, okay? But what is it also? Think about it. It's also a recipe for disaster. If I give them root and somebody make a mistake, I got a big mistake. So there are two ways that excessive privilege can cause tremendous problems for your organization. First, people can abuse that account. The abuse of that account can be done even by a trusted party. Look at the Snowden case, let's say. That's an administrator gone rogue who abused their privilege and their access to the detriment of the enterprise. Their detriment not only to the enterprise, to the United States, and even to his company, Booz Allen, right? So even today, after an example like Eric Snowden, you've heard that other incidents have occurred since then. It's hard for a lot of organizations to focus skepticism on what their most trusted people are doing. You know, you won't want to point your finger at somebody, but the most trustworthy staff in the world, the account itself, the representation of that person on your system, you simply can't trust them. It cannot and should not be trusted in this day and age. I don't know the word, complicitly, explicitly. You can't trust it. Your administrator credentials, not the data, are the crown jewels today that's sought by attackers. Once that person gets administrative privilege on your system, all else falls. You know, those attackers don't target the information anymore. They'll target the data, not at first at least. What they do is they look at the privilege accounts, and those privilege accounts are the gateway to everything else. Your email, your data, your databases, your files, your system configs, applications, all that stuff. Everything becomes exposed once that privilege account is breached. Okay? So those insider accounts that I have, I'm calling them insider accounts because they're my sysadmins, they have to be treated with suspicion. Not because of the people. I'm not pointing my finger at the people who are assigned to it, but because they're the most valuable assets to those who want to attack us. So we have to pay attention. Next is alert and notification. So this is just natural for you to a well-implemented logging and audit system like I was just talking about. So not every minor violation needs to be escalated up to management or to my sysadmin if it's 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm telling them to come in. But there's certainly some things that should be escalated. And in order to determine that, you might ask yourself these questions I have here, or similar questions. Is access from an account attempted from a host where it should, let me read this again. Is access from an account attempted from a host where it should not originate from? Are they doing it from a McDonald's parking lot instead of wherever it is assigned? Okay, is an SSH key being used for a place where it should not? Okay, is an administrator account attempting to run privileged commands that they're not granted to, they're not allowed to? Okay, First, a well-implemented system with well-defined rules should stop this kind of behavior, or any type of bad behavior. So if we can look at logs and we know that something should not be happening, that also means that we can build rules around that to prevent it from happening. And that's what I want you to get out of this. The right rules in place is going to be preventative for us. So the difference is that we detect and alert things proactively instead of reactively. When I was law enforcement, one of the biggest things about law enforcement is that we're mostly reactive. If a crime happens, we show up after the fact. With security, we want to make sure that we're being proactive. We're fixing things before it happens. Okay, this is the concept that I call. I don't call it this. This is just what it's called. But it's called detection through enforcement. So the same rules that can be written to detect that bad behavior should be used to prevent that bad behavior at the same time. Next, I want to centralize and unify your systems. Okay, so there are many valuable features, and I talked about a few of them available natively in your Linux and your Unix system. Okay, SSH, for instance, allows for the local configuration to control who can access, from where, how, and what they can do once they connect it. Your accounts can be managed at the local system with, let's say, an add user command, or the user delete command, user del command, del command, and there are various techniques that you use for leaving an account in place but actually blocking access to it. So privilege can be managed using sudo, as I talked about before, and local configuration files. And everything that can be done in the setup and configuration of that local system. But this presents an enormous challenge for us. Okay, for one system and only a few users, it might be easy for me to manage those few accounts. That SSH configuration and those access rules and those pseudo permissions is easy because I don't have a lot of them. But each time I add an additional server or more users or whatever, that's going to amplify the effort that I need to maintain the proper configuration on my system, and it's going to make it blow up exponentially. Okay, so one or a few servers, it might be tedious, but it might be an achievable challenge for me. But what about when I got hundreds or thousands of servers or tens or hundreds of users on it? So keeping servers properly configured is going to become an enormous task for me. And arguably, it's going to be impossible for me to achieve without an army of administrators that I hire and have to pay for. And a manual host-by-host approach is also going to be error-prone. The more administrators I have, the more chance I have for mistaken errors. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to tightly couple that access control and that privilege management, to, like I said, a centralized system. And that's going to give me some distinct advantages over trying to manage them separately. And in the Unix Linux world, access control should be tightly coupled with that account control that I spoke about. So for that, you're going to have a tool that's going to allow you to centrally manage all three aspects of access and privilege. And that's account management, that's access control, and that's privilege management. So I want to talk about how to do that. I want to move now into the benefits of having that privileged access management system in your Unix environment. So for me, it's data integrity, and data integrity is going to be very important for my organization, for your organization, anybody that's on this webinar today. And that information and the underlying infrastructure that I have there is going to be the lifeblood of my business. By the way, I work for the IRS, so that's the lifeblood of our business. We need information. I know you all probably wish we would lose that information, but we need to keep that information. So that data is only increasing in both volume and velocity, especially when we get your around tax season at the IRS. So people are building bigger and bigger teams. Even if you're an international company, you're using global teams, and that's expanding. And as such, the future of my business and your business is more likely to have a growing number of internal and external access points. So those, well, let me take a step back there. So worldwide, we have collaboration and upswing of using independent contractors and freelancers, and we use contractors at the IRS and all that for targeted work. That's going to bring to light the safety and security of my current IT system. And this is where privileged access management is going to come into play. And also, there are going to be compliance rules. I mentioned compliance earlier. There's compliance rules and regulations that you are going to have to adhere to. Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, all those type of things. So you're going to have a system that's going to actively manage your user access to your information. Your business is going to depend on the accuracy of and privacy of that information. I know that none of you all on this webinar want me to release any of your tax information out there through some type of IRS leak. So therefore, managing that who, that what, that where, when, and how, I mean not how, but how and why regarding access to your information cannot be underestimated. Okay, so using a privileged access management system is going to be a way for you to guard against this. Now, there's two things that I'm trying to protect, or two things that I'm concerned with, two primary concerns. One is password integrity benefits, and one is workflow and session management benefits. And let me talk about those briefly. When I'm talking about password integrity benefits, it goes without saying that everything that we have in some way has to be password protected. Now, the management of those passwords is just as important as those passwords itself. I mean, I can have 15, 20 passwords out there, you know, especially if I'm single sign-on, somebody get my one password and get access to a lot of different systems. So it's important to manage the passwords themselves. So layers of security at the point of access have a higher deterrence value, and privileged access management specifically targets that first security layer. But if you want to have a robust password management system, it's going to be crucial for you to go out for both deterring those data breaches and also aligning with certain regulatory standards, as I spoke about. So privileged access management is going to offer you different type of password management solutions that's going to meet your industrial, your government, whatever type of compliance that you have. One of the things that I want to talk about is password vaulting. So password leaks and data breaches are going to keep increasing. It's not going to stop. We see it in the news every day. Reusing those passwords increase the likelihood of our system and our data being compromised, and that's just something we have to deal with. However, it shouldn't be a problem. It should be a detriment. A primary level of additional security can be provided if we go out and use a PAM system or privileged access. I'm going to call it PAM for now. It's easier. PAM system. And we can do that by password vaulting. And that's where passwords are stored in a digital location and then further protected by some type of encryption via a single password. So what is this going to do for me, Derek? This is going to make sure that extremely limited access to all my administrative password is being taken, okay? And it's going to make it difficult for people to do data breaches based on getting my password. The second thing I have there, the second point bullet I have is password change and generation. So with your PAM system, you have a choice of whether to generate random password values or you can just rotate the current password set. Now that can be done either manually or it can be done by an individual that you would go out and assign password management role, or you can have an automated function with a PAM system. So each time a user goes out and requests access, they're going to be presented with a new password. And then when we set it up for automatic generation, that PAM system is going to release or reset either your individual password or groups of password, but it's also going to go back and ensure a match between that current login and every target account to make sure that person is not getting into something he's not supposed to. And it's also, and here's another thing, if I have to reissue a password, that PAM system is going to generate a report that's going to detail when I reissued that, and it's going to have failed passwords and things like that. For you cyber guys out there, that's an important cybersecurity signal that that a lot of passwords are being reissued. And the last thing I have on this slide is target system grouping and detection. So if there is more than one individual accessing the same area in your server, that privileged access management system is going to grant targeted and separate access to those people. And that's going to reinforce that there's no anonymity between them regarding who's operating within that system. You have the capability to assign a limited role to those people for administrative access. They can get a basic role or they can get like an administrative role or something like that. And what PAM does is that it supports that. And it also supports something else. It supports detection of those users. Once you give them that role-based access, it's going to support detection of that user access throughout your company and throughout all the different access points you have in your company, whether or not that request is being issued for the same area or a different part of your system. Okay? So depending on that PAM software that you choose to put out there or deploy, this targeting is going to occur automatically, hopefully, and it's going to free up the people that work for you to focus on other pressing systemic issues that you might have in your environment, or just keeping that thing running in the first place. Now, I mentioned two things. The second one is workflow and session management benefits. And let me see what my time is. Okay, so I'm not going to go through all these. I'll choose a couple of them, but when you're in the business world or government, whatever, and we know it's been globalizing for some time now, you know, it used to be all your IT department or your IT stuff was in-house, okay? But now, you know, this is decreasingly the case. A lot of stuff we're outsourcing to other people, okay? What happens is that as those additional IT people on board or other people leave your company, there's going to be issues such as privilege creep and session management and things like that, and that could cause a problem for you. So privileged access management is going to help you to minimize those issues with workflow and session management that can encourage, or I shouldn't say encourage, but discourage that privilege creep due to the roles of the people in your organization changing, or new people coming and going and all that. So I'm not going to have time to go through each one of these, but you know, we have automation. You know, the flow of information is getting larger and larger, so we want to automate a lot of our processes. And one of the primary benefits of that PAM system is that it allows your IT professionals to focus their attention on the more important projects that they have, and to help you, help your enterprise or whatever. And that PAM system will go out and it's going to alert me for anything like if a password fails or password request or web application trends. I can set up what's going to alert me. Then I have fail-safe preparation, managing access for non-employees, those contractors and things, those subcontractor personnel. It's going to offer me solutions by including role-based access only, like I talked about before. It's going to help. I did a webinar not long ago on break fast, break glass. And so if there's emergency access, I might have to have some emergency process in place, and that PAM system is going to allow for that, and so on. So I'm not going to go through all these once again. What I want to do now is I want to just give a brief intermission here. So what happens is that now we're going to have our information security, and it's going to be constantly evolving for us, okay? And privileged access management, the things that we put in place, the different things that I talk about here, especially putting privileged access management plan in place and tools in place, they're going to be relevant to our security objectives, and they're going to help us achieve those objectives. So what I want to do is I want to turn it over to my partner. He's going to tell you more about how we do privileged access management and how it can help you in your Linux and Unix environment. So Rod, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you could hear me just fine.
Yes, we can.
Awesome. I was actually laughing when you made the comment of hoping the IRS loses stuff, and I was like, would I rather hit the Powerball or have them lose and never pay taxes again? So
I would take the tax one.
I am so with you. All right, so let me jump into the rest of this here, and I promise to keep this right on point for you guys, and hopefully we'll get you out of here at the top of the hour. All right, so mainly I'm going to focus today on the PowerBroker Unix Linux solution, but Derek covered a lot of really cool things like password management that a lot of times when people implement a solution, whether it be sudo or you can use PowerBroker sudo to enhance that solution, the problems they want to solve after they implement least privilege control is I want to take the password for root, for example, vault it, and then have it scrambled constantly. So people can get it when they need it, but it's constantly changed. When we're talking about privilege management, we're really just talking about trying to control what they can do. And it's not just like, even though this focus is about Unix and Linux, we could be talking about privilege management for Windows and privilege management for Mac, because that's what we do have in our enterprises. So again, I'm going to focus on PowerBroker Unix Linux and some of the capabilities we can drive and deliver to you, and we'll talk about a little bit of that. And a lot of the data from there feeds up into our Beyond Insight, which is just a risk management platform to look at it. So to explain what PowerBroker Unix Linux does, and I'm going to do it at a very high level, is we try to eliminate the need for sharing accounts, track and audit and log everything you do, because it's not just about auditing. Obviously, one of the key things that I want to be able to do is, if I have to go to court, I want to have an indelible audit trail I can take into court. They can look at and say he has a documented process for how he does this, controls and manages the logs, which means it can be submitted as evidence. That's honestly one of the most critical things you got to think about. When you start thinking about system level control, it's maybe I do need to give someone a root shell, but I want to control what they can do when they do have that root shell. So essentially, I want to even limit what root can do on a system. So I'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll give a demo around that. And then again, I want to extend and I want to manage across the entire enterprise. So I need something that can scale, because Derek kind of highlighted the challenge is that when you're managing sudo and islands, it's like it's very easy when you have 1, 2, 3, 10 servers. But the customers I talk to have 240,000, 500,000, 90,000, 70,000 Unix and Linux servers they're managing, and that becomes significantly harder. So that's what we'll touch on and talk about a little bit here today. Last but not least in my slides, I think this should be my last slide, I'll talk a little bit about how PowerBroker actually works. Essentially, you're sitting on a client or one of your Linux servers. You want to do something. You essentially type your command you want to do. It looks at the policy server and says, hey, is this approved or rejected? No matter what happens there, it's always logged. My policy could dictate he can do it, but I want to record everything he does. All that stuff gets recorded, and then it's indexed and searchable. So the challenge with any time where you're going to record a session is, think about your Linux administrators. You might be one. You jump on a system. In any 8-hour day, you might have typed hundreds of commands. So you got to be able to find it, and you need a Google-style type search or Bing search, if that's your thing, to be able to go out and find what the user did. I want to know what the user did, and then the user gets the results of the command. So if I got to turn on recording gets turned on, I want to log the fact that the user requested to do this, who did it, who is it going to run as, am I going to elevate the command, not elevate the command, and let all those things happen. And then from Beyond Insight, you get all this reporting, index searching against that. So if you want to say, this server shut down, and I want to know who did it, being able to go against an index and say, just give me who ran the shutdown command on this server today, it's very easy to look at, and that's kind of the stuff we'll talk about. So I'm going to jump through here, and Sarah, you guys are seeing my screen, right? I should have asked that question, or Derek, either one.
Yeah, looks great.
Yes.
Awesome. All right, so let me just go ahead and log in. We'll log back into my server here. So I'm going to log in as demo 1. Oh, there was something else I forgot about. Derek actually brought up about running the W command so you could figure out who was logged onto a system. Another really cool command to leverage, because sometimes it's not about who is logged on, it's about who last logged on. So I always give the example of, it worked, it's been working for 9 months, and all of a sudden today it doesn't work. Obviously someone did something. So the other thing you could do is use the last command, but pipe it to head. And now I can see the users who recently logged onto my system. And it's a really nice way to kind of look at it. So I see demo 1 because I was going in and out of the system, but I can see Amy and Ray were in there. So if there's something wrong or something went on, I actually at least know who were the last people. My system got shut down. Well, when I bring it back up, maybe I want to know this type of information, or something went awry on the system, and this would be one of those very useful and helpful things. So what I'm going to do is some really basic stuff here for you. Well, first thing I'll do is I'll do a PB run, and and I'm just going to do a bash on this. So I'm going to get a root shell. So right now, if I do an ID, you can see that I'm currently root. So I think I'm in root's home directory. So can't type today. I can't type and talk, actually. So the first thing I'll try to do is I'm root. So, and I showed you that. I'll just try to run a who am I. And you'll notice I'm getting permission denied. There's no logical reason why I shouldn't be able to run a who am I command as root. But if I do an ls, come on, Rod, type today. There we go. And all right, if I look at the permissions on it, you can see that anybody can execute the who am I command, but for some reason I'm root and I can't. Now I have a symlink in my directory, so, and I try to run my symlink, I'm still getting permission denied. It's ridiculous. I can't run who am I, and part of this is PowerBroker taking over and controlling, because I said you're logged in as root, but I'm going to restrict your ability to run who am I. Like, even though, again, I have a root shell, I can't run the who am I command, and that's some of the power you get with a solution like PowerBroker. One of the cool things we do is that everything that I'm doing here is being recorded right now. That was told to you before that I was recording that session. I'm highlighting that for you guys to see it. But also it's being logged. So every command that I'm typing is being logged. All the commands I'm typing are being indexed because it's being recorded. All of that's going off to an external box. So unlike something like sudo where it's doing all its logging locally, all my logging's off box. It's over a secure network channel. One of the value adds of all of that stuff being over a secure network channel that I like to point out is no one can tamper with the logs. Because if I had a root shell, I could just go to I think var log messages, and then I could just go ahead and manipulate your log files. Unless you're picking that up in real time with something like Splunk, you wouldn't know that I was manipulating your message if you were polling and picking it up every 3 to 5 minutes. So that's one example. So really quick, in my last demonstration I'll do for you, I'm going to switch over to my scripts directory. So I have a script in here called demo script, and let's just cat that out. All right, so all you have to do is, really quick, you'll see that my script is going to tell you it's starting. it's going to tell you it's stopping, but it should never get to the fact that it's completed. Why? Because I run the reboot command in there, and I cat out files, and all that stuff is actually happening within the script. So what we're going to do is quickly just run the script. There we go. So I'm going to run my script. Now, this should really torch my demo because it's going to shut down, but it didn't. Like, magically, we got to the end of the script, and it ran. Why? Because my policy dictated that, yeah, you can't run reboot. And I can block any single command, even though, again, as I pointed out, I'm root. So what PowerBroker allows you to do is a lot of flexibility, whether it be I want to not let a user log onto a system, but run a command on a remote system, or, more importantly, I'd like a user to be able to have a root shell, but then even once in that root shell, I want to be able to control or restrict certain things they can do. So sometimes least privilege and saying I want to do a command by command what the user can do is definitely viable for organizations. But sometimes it says I need to give a root shell, but I need to take these 50 different things and say you can't do them. And that's kind of some of the additional power you get by leveraging something like a PowerBroker Unix Linux. So Sarah, I'm going to turn it back over to you because I know that we probably have questions and stuff like that. We got like 2 minutes to wrap it up, and I want to make sure we get full questions and stuff.
Yep, we'll jump right back in. Okay, so let's jump into our last poll, guys. Here at Beyond Trust, we'd love to help you with your privileged access management needs. Would you be interested in engaging with one of our security experts further? We'd love to chat or even take you through a more thorough one-on-one demo of either PowerBroker for Unix Linux or any one of our other products or solutions. So let us know, select yes. I'll leave this up. Let's dive right into questions. We had a bunch come in, so let me go ahead and open up my question panel. And Derek, this came in for you. Can the built-in monitoring tools in Linux be compromised or removed by a hacker who has gained access to the server as the root admin?
Derek, we can't hear you, just so you know.
Derek, you might be on mute.
I'm sorry, I was. And Rod, you can jump in and help me with this one. But my thing is this: once the person has compromised your network and he is root, they don't know if it's you or anybody else. So unfortunately, they can probably go in and make some changes. Our job is to make sure that they don't compromise our system in the first place and become root. Root gives you the power. Rod, you want to add to that?
No, I think you hit it home. I mean, obviously the thing is we're trying to do is restrict the access to the root account, and the vast majority of the reasons why it gets compromised is weak passwords, static passwords that haven't changed in a very long period of time, or misuse of SSH keys where we're using it on a number of systems. So, or more importantly, 90% of people, or I should say 90% of people should not permit root to SSH into a box. You should have to go to the console to do a root login. And that's kind of typical. Once you get on the box, then you can elevate to root, but typically you don't allow root to do an SSH login.
So we help you prevent that in the first place.
You got it.
Another question, maybe both of you guys can jump in on this one. You talked about removing shared accounts, but what about instances of where you can manage a system with a shared account while maintaining non-repudiation, sorry, I don't know if I know that word, and accountability? Yeah, repudiation, thank you.
So I can jump in on that. So yes, you do want to try to remove accounts whenever possible. The question is, sorry, can you just repeat the question again, Sarah, because I got stumbled when you tripped up.
Yeah, sorry. What about instances of where you can manage a system with a shared account while maintaining non-repudiation and accountability?
Yeah,
because you talked about removing shared accounts.
Yeah, so in the scenario where someone needs to be root, for an example where I just did that demo where I essentially did a pbrem bash and I got a root shell. Well, when I invoked that root shell, even though I'm root, and the native logs on Unix will say, root did this, you have a separate set of logs that actually says, Rod elevated to root, and here's the entire indelible recorded session of what Rod did from the time he got his root shell to the time he exited his root shell. That's your log. So even though I'm using a, quote, shared account as root, this is one way to record. A password vault is another way to solve that exact problem, is I go to a password vault, check out root, and then log in via the password vault. So I'm not actually seeing the credential. I'm auto-logged in. It's recording, but it has a track record of saying, Rod was the one who requested it, he got it, he logged in, and here's the recording of all of his activity.
Sorry, we have a couple more questions. I know we're at the top of the hour, but I wanted to get these in. Rod, does an agent run on the server?
Yeah, so with PBUL, I'm going to assume that's where the question is, does PBUL have an agent that runs on a server? It's a daemon, so PBUL doesn't run unless invoked, would be the answer to that question.
Okay, and then I think this might be for you as well, Rod. Once a user switches to root, not ideal, can I still track that user?
So in my scenario where I did a PB run bash and I became root versus an SU to root, can I still track that user? And the answer for PBUL is absolutely.
Okay,
Hopefully
wonderful.
I answered the question they wanted.
Yeah, I think so. And John, if he didn't, we can reach out to you afterward. I did also receive a couple of questions asking about the replay and the slides, and yes, you will be receiving a link to the recording and the slides shown here today within a business day. So if you don't receive it tomorrow, you will definitely receive it by Monday at the latest. So you can share it, re-watch, and write down your notes or whatever and share with your colleagues as you see fit. So with that, I would like to have extend a big thanks again to our speakers today and everybody who attended live. We really enjoy you guys being here. Thank you to Derek and Rod. A lot of information in 60 minutes. Thank you for being here. And everybody have a wonderful rest of your day and week. We will see you at the next one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody.